Okay, great. So I'm going to say good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody who's joining us today, wherever you are. And welcome to those who've joined us later via the video on our YouTube channel. Thank you. It's great to see you all, obviously, and we're always delighted that you join us to share your knowledge and to learn from each other. That's the very essence of what we do and how we succeed at it. While we get ready to start, what I'd love you to do is post in the comments what you're doing for Christmas, Hanukkah, Body Day, all the holidays, whatever you call it, and also what you'd rather be doing. I'll start. I'll put something in the comments momentarily. It's great to see the festive tops and the festive spirit. And I haven't told him this, but our special guest is going to judge the best one, and we'll organise sending a prize to the winner. And I don't want to win really, but I have put a Welsh Christmas jumper on because Simon is from Wales.
I'm afraid the rest of you've already lost. That's just the way it is.
Typical.
Yeah, I don't think I can win. That doesn't feel very fair. So everyone, today our special guest is Simon Bowen, and I know Simon from his days as MD at a company that we both worked for from 2011. So Simon worked there for nearly 5 years. I worked there for 12 years. And when he joined us, he brought with him a kind of deep commitment for doing something extraordinary for the way we thought about ourselves, how we improved, developed and innovated, ensuring that we implemented a culture of looking out for each other. Since then, he's gone on to become the interim chair for Great British Nuclear, having previously been appointed as the industry advisor to the UK Prime Minister and Home Secretary. I invited Simon to join us to give some insights around developing safe organisational cultures, supporting learning from experience, unlocking work's potential, and improving safety performance and innovation. So there's still people arriving. I'm just going to go through the comments, see if anybody's put anything in. I need my glasses. Can't see them.
I can't believe anybody'd want to be on a beach rather than being here listening to me.
I was thinking about you, but living near the sea and being on a beach and whether you can surf in the winter.
Yeah, I do all year round. I was surfing about 3 days ago. So yeah.
Very
absolutely.
nice. Very nice.
I can't see the comments. I'm cringing because.
So we've got eating too much. Mike is going to be eating too much. Barbara is spending time with her family, but she'd rather be on a warm beach. Nicole would rather be on. Nicole is going to be on a warm beach with the family. Lynn's having a quiet one at home, but she'd rather be celebrating a lottery win somewhere warm and sunny. Phil is traveling to the other side of the UK, but would much rather be working. He's such a creep.
Nice one, Phil.
That was me. Sorry.
Was it all right? Okay. The other Phil is going to be in Abu Dhabi. Very nice too. Somebody else from Paradigm is going to be at my parents, and uncles are around.
That's Phil Gillen.
Would rather be somewhere else.
Partners' parents.
Christmas in London, different branches of the family, rather be at home drinking breakfast colladas. This has got to be this is you, Claire. It's got to be.
It can only be me, can't it?
Having a nap and then eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs. I like the sound of that. Roger is going to be playing a ridiculous amount of role-playing games. It's an addiction. I think that's probably one you shouldn't share out loud, actually, Roger. We all want to know what role-play games. Mike is in New Mexico. And there's a lovely picture there from him. Dan, my background is as close as I'm getting to the beaches. Yeah, tell me about it. Tell me about it. Sorry, I couldn't let people in because I'm not a host, so I apologize for that. But I can see Zoe, Sam, and Mr. Reed have turned up as well. So it's great to see you all.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Teresa. I can see the notes now. I feel who's that image from? That Mike Petrowski, that image, I've seen that in a film recently. I'm sure I have. But if that's your house, very nice, very nice.
No, but it's the architecture that's here, and then they put these they're candles inside of a paper bag, but most of the time they're plastic and they're electrified. But they put them on the roof line, and it's really interesting to see. It's unique to this Southwest.
Very effective. Right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand over to Simon. Simon, thank you for being with us. take it away.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you for sharing and allowing me to be part of this. What a great community. It's just, I love coming on to communities where there's just such a vibe between everybody and everybody gets on and all having just a bit of fun. It's just fantastic. And what a great relief it is from dealing with the UK government. And a contrast. So as Claire very generously said, I'm a leader by background, I guess. Why is that? So what you'll hear from me is not the expertise that sits around the room, because as soon as I saw Diane on the call, I was thinking, oh God, she knows so much more about this than I do. I'm going to have a critique online, because I'm a passionate generalist, I think is probably the way I describe myself, as an operational leader. And at the heart of who I am, I put people first, and always have. And that's it always sounds a bit cheesy or kind of inauthentic, but what I mean by it is, if you genuinely care for people and you put them first, no matter what they want to do, whether they want to leave an organization or they want to stay, or if you genuinely care for human beings, then they do remarkable things, and it just creates, I think, a more pleasant working environment. So I thought where I'd start is, so I am not an expert in error reduction. I've practiced leadership for, God, too long, decades, and I continue to. And the chief executive that works for me at the moment said something I was really, really touched by. And she said, "You still really care about improving your leadership?" Because I showed her the front of my book, which has got my leadership kind of capabilities I'm working on. I'm currently working on judging, which is really fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Why is that important? Because when you form an opinion about an individual, you just end up with all these biases that come forward, and the only person it impacts is you. And it's one of those aha moments. So I find myself, when I'm getting into judging, but it was just such a nice thing to say, is even at your age, i.e. you're old, you're still working on it. And I am, because I deeply care. So what is it about? What is it about leadership? So I've worked in a number of different organizations, some of which I'm really proud of what we've done, some of which I'm deeply frustrated about how far we've got. If I take the case study of the organization that Claire and I worked in, this was an organization that was full of great people, but I probably didn't make myself that popular with the executives when I said it was successful despite itself. And it was. I mean, it was exactly, and that's exactly the way it was. But it had formed itself into an organization where people were disconnected. It was really hierarchical. And it just struck me as screaming out for a bit of just genuine care and leadership. And why is that important? Well, at a point, I think at the core of who I am and the core of really great leadership and what I've seen is that if you can demonstrate that you genuinely care about individuals, and they really, really buy it, not words, but deeds and consistent deeds, then they'll do stuff for you, and they'll believe you, and they'll follow you. And in the work we did at it was Urenco. I'm bound to say it, so I may as well just get it out there now. At Urenco. So I also spent time in New Mexico. Love New Mexico. We had this almost like a perfect size organization, 600 people, around about that number, but enough so that you could know everybody. And knowing everybody is really important to me, because I love to spend a lot of time in the field. And if and at the heart, if you don't remember anything out of what I say, one is care, and two is the amount of time you spend talking to people, and not talking to them, but listening to them. So I kind of have three things I try and live from: is what you say matters, how you listen matters, and how you act matters. And they've all got to be consistent. They're all going to be completely consistent, because leadership is a 24/7 thing where people are watching to see whether you're consistent with what you say. And the listen thing, I think, is really interesting, because that's the way you demonstrate you care. And the art of listening, and it is a bit of an art form, I think, is just something that's lost on many of us. But the way in which you engage with people and listen to what they've got to say, I think, is at the heart of engaging a workforce. So how do you go about engaging? Well, In the work that I've tried to do, what I attempt to do is to be very clear about what I stand for as values. And whether it was, you know, in our organization, we were to drive safety very hard. So safety was absolutely at the forefront. Safety, people, and performance, we talked a lot about, Claire. And we had to live from that all the time. And the first people I had to convince was the kind of executive team, the leadership team, that they had to live from that 24/7 as well. It wasn't just me. And then working out how we then got that message out into the organization. And one of the things that Claire talked to me about is, what's the value of learning? Well, we then invested a pile of money in the leadership, because I was lucky enough in Diane's old organization in BP to do a program called Manager of the Future. And Manager of the Future was all about discovering about yourself. And it was a very expensive program, but a number of us were put on it, and it absolutely changed my life. And how? Because everything just fell into place about why I was the way I was. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It was like, well, okay, I now fundamentally understand who I am, and I understand why I react in the way I do. And it was kind of started me on a journey of, right, okay, well, if that's accessible to me and that allows me to kind of access different levels of performance, because it stops me being fearful of my failure or recognizing when I'm kind of in a racket or I'm stuck, why wouldn't that be great to educate an organization? So we took the majority of the leaders at Urenco through a program which allowed them to go on that journey themselves. And it was an investment in them, not an investment in the company. It was an investment in them personally to start off with, to see what it would open up for them. I ended up leaving BP as a result of doing the program, and BP was mature enough to realize that that's what would happen to some people, because they kind of discover that's you know, that's the direction of travel, and that's where people go. What we did in Urenco was to try and create a common language with a whole group of leaders across the organization, and a common sense of purpose, so that we could all align around what we were trying to do. And it was successful with some people and it was not successful in others. And why is that important? Because I really like the definition of culture, where people talk about culture being the personality of an organization. And when was the last time you saw a person change their personality? And it's a really helpful thing to say, well, I'm going to change the culture in 2 years. No, you're not. It's never going to happen. But I think the way you do that is, one, to demonstrate that you care about them individually and that you want them to be successful. I also love the phrase about, you know, train people so they can leave, treat them so they don't. And if you look at that kind of as a premise, well, why don't we get out there as a group of people and really demonstrate that we care about them as individuals, and talk to the first level leaders and the second level leaders, who I think are the most important people in the organization, and really get to understand what their issues are. And the route to error-free performance and great safety performance is to have the hearts and minds of the first and second level leaders, and to really connect with them. And for me, as the kind of the leader of the organization, was to have people like Claire in the organization where we could go to and say, is what I'm doing landing, or is it utter nonsense? And she was always in the utter nonsense camp. So it was like, okay, better change of direction is required. So the whole thing was about train people so that they really understand themselves better, so they can be more comfortable as human beings and understand why they are the way they are, and really can understand how they drive performance as a result of that. And also so that we could form a much tighter connection. I'll come to you, Claire, in a second. I think you got your hand up. So we could form a much tighter connection, and by equipping people with the same language and the same values, and being clear about the purpose that we all stood for me, then started to create a real cultural shift in the organization, because people could see what was in it for them. And for me, that was kind of the start of what we were trying to do. So I'll pause there and take a question from whoever had the hand up.
was me, Simon. Thank you. My question's actually from Mike Petrowski. He has obviously heard you talk about listening and saying and doing, and he's asking, is there a priority for those three things?
Yeah, absolutely. Listening. Listening is the only priority. My wife would be laughing her head off, actually, if she heard me talking about this, as I say, you listening. Yeah, right. The art of active listening and people being heard, regardless of whether you don't agree with them or they don't agree with your direction of travel, if they feel that they've been heard, something special happens. And it may take them time, but if they genuinely believe that you're interested enough to listen to their opinion, then there is an opening for a conversation. Until they've been heard, there's no opening, because they listen through their own filters, and until they've created a permission with you to hear what you say, then then things don't shift. I think the acting for me is, if you say something as a leader, so I espouse the values of things like authenticity, being trustworthy, and being honest to my word. And when I got things wrong, I would tell people, and that I would put safety first above everything. Then that's setting myself up as to say that's what I stand for. And the thing I really liked about it is when you did that and you weren't consistent with it, if people would call you out on it, and it just allowed me to be a better human being. But also, what it allowed people to test is whether I was a serious human being about leadership and whether I really meant what I said. So the acting side of things sits, I think, a little bit in the background, which is a check for us all as leaders. But the listening and being responsible for what comes out of your mouth are very much in the interactions and the conversations that we all need, right at the heart of the organization, because that's what actually, everything lives in a conversation, doesn't it? Does that answer the question? As you can see, there's no short answers with me.
Mike, is that what you wanted to hear, or what you wanted to know?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks.
So if you look at and then there's some what does that then make possible? I'm as you know, as some of you know, I'm an absolute safety zealot, and it's something that is not hurting people is right at the heart of who I am. And there was, an incident that happened to me in BP many years ago, where I had to explain to a family why their father and their husband was a completely different human being as a result of a brain injury he'd had at work, and it kind of completely shifted my view of the world on safety, and has been something that's driven me ever since. I think safety and people's willingness to engage in the conversation starts in care and trust. If people believe that you genuinely care about them as a human being, and it isn't just management BS, and it isn't just a corporate thing which gives you a bonus, that it's genuinely based in keeping them safe, then I think you open a different conversation. It was cracking today. 2 days ago in the office here in London, there was an electrician from a different company right on the top of the steps of his really sturdy steps, but he was on the top and he had his head right in the roof, and he was right by the door. And I said to him, look, I said, I'm really not comfortable with what you're doing. Are you comfortable up there? Because you don't look that steady. And he went, I'm absolutely fine, mate. I said, right, good. I said, well, I'm going to stand at the bottom of the steps and make sure that no one hits you through the door. He said, I'm going to be up here a while. I said, well, I'm not going anywhere. It's fine. And then we ended up with a rotor in the office to make sure. Well, why is that important? Well, because at the end of it, he said, well, thank you so much, because you actually cared about me. And that's all he was left with, I think, was care. So what was that important, as opposed to it doing, well done me? Well, if you set a standard of, I never walk by, then best you don't. Because you've got to live from that. And that's the whole thing about saying, acting. So what with all of that? In terms of organizations then, how do you create an environment where they are prepared to report and are prepared to speak up? I think it only starts with the point where they trust, where they trust you, and by the you I mean they've got to trust the senior leaders to all act consistently with, I'm not going to blame you, I just want to understand what's happened to help you. And you've got to work with the first and second level leaders, because they are the people that set the culture in the organization for me, and they are the people that drive the culture. So at a point where, and that's why, you know, workforce engagement is spending loads and loads of time in the field in conversation with people to understand what's really driving them, is so important to me, and I think is at the core of how do you get a, you know, an error-free and a great culture where people report and are committed to the kind of overall, you know, objectives of the organization. For me, it's all about the level of engagement and having the first and second level leaders buying exactly what you stand for and really living from it as a standard. Because at a point where they don't, then actually, you know, you're not going to get anywhere in my book. So how do you create an organization which is prepared to report? Firstly, you have to create an environment where they don't feel blamed, or they don't feel that there's a threat of being blamed. And Diana and I were in a great conversation about fair and just culture, and some of the work that BP have done in that space, I think, is really inspiring. I was just left humbled by the kind of the conversation we had about how far that thinking had moved on. So first thing is all about that they won't in any, they will always be supported. The second piece is really important, which is you have to act on what they say. So it comes back to the listening. It's all very well listening, but when you thin out and pop back to your office and put on your pot coffee percolator and have your posh coffee, as they would see, that you are actually going to do something about it. And therefore feeding back to them to say, actually, I'm not going to do something about that because of this, this, and this, or here's what I've done, becomes really, really important. So they've got to trust you that you'll act in a way that they feel they're treated fairly, but they've also got to believe that what you're going to do, that you're going to do something about their concerns. Now, you know, what you don't want to do, obviously, is take all of the responsibility off them as an organization. But I think as a starting point, that's, for me, in our journey that we went on, and I've been on in other places, that's absolutely at the start of it. Now, how do you create an environment where they start to do that for themselves and act at themselves? Is, you know, and it was one of the questions Claire asked, is, you know, how do you empower organizations and people to just get on with stuff? Well, I love the metric of decisions per person per day. And I think it comes from the error-free, the safety conscious work environment that exists in the nuclear industry in the US. But I think that's where it's kind of starts. But that as a measure of driving operational change is really interesting, because we did that in the nuclear industry. Actually, I did it in Sellafield to start off with. The frightening, I wish I hadn't said Sellafield now, because that would make him sound really bad. But anyway, I've just said it out loud, and I've said it twice, so you all know what I'm talking about. Never mind. We did a doers and watchers study, so we thought, I wonder how free people feel to do their work. For every person doing work, we had 3 people watching them or checking what they were doing, and it's just like, oh my good grief, that is just unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. And we then did the piece of work of decisions per person per day. Well, the decisions at the core of the organization with our technician workforce was 0, because they escalated everything, because it was a kind of source of, of authority. You know, you can't make decisions because, and giving, you know, moving. I remember when we were working in, let me just so nod if this is giving you something useful, or if it's just a stream of consciousness that's just quite dull.
It's great, Simon. Thank you.
It's but if you look at the stuff we did with the when people made decisions, we just once we got the organization to kind of trust, what we then tried to do is to say to the supervisors. I mean, we're in a ridiculous situation where a shift supervisor, the day they were promoted, bought a tie, to wear a tie, because you wear a tie when you're a supervisor. No, you're on shift with the guys you've been working for the last 20 years. why on earth are you wearing a tie? And it's like, well, you know, you've got to show authority. No, you don't. Why don't you just behave in a way where you're the leader of the team? Oh my good grief. That's amazing. All right. So you could win second prize as well with that. But so why is that even relevant? Well, it's relevant because these signs matter. So no, I'm the supervisor, so I make the decisions. No, you're not. Why don't you let the guy who's you know who's out there on the plant make his own decisions? And what we had to do is go through a whole process of rewriting a lot of the operating procedures to give the authority to the technicians. We put a lot of stuff in place where, you know, in terms of daily stand-ups, weekly stand-ups, all that kind of stuff, the rigor that you put into operating companies to drive all of the decision-making further down the organization. What was the impact? Operational effectiveness went through the roof because we gave the decisions to the people who are actually that have the knowledge and the skill to make them. And what it also did is free a pile of time up for the supervisors to do what they should be doing, i.e. coaching and supporting. And so there's kind of multiple things in that in an operating culture for me, which of course starts with leadership, but it also, you know, there's many phrases as you hear that I love. Context is decisive is another thing I keep thinking about is what's the context that we create as leaders? And for me, the context is always, yes, it's care. You've heard me talk about that, but it's also space. It's space for you to make decisions and to crack on. And we will support you when you get things wrong, because, you know, it starts with intent. If your intent was to do a great job, as 99% of us are trying to do, and you made a mistake, well, you made a mistake and you've learned from it, so let's all move on. But there's something there for me about saying, right, what's the context I'm creating as a leader? Comes back to, you know, listen, you know, speak, act, all of that sort of stuff is, what's the context I create? Well, as soon as you go down, if something bad has happened, the first question you ask is not who's to blame, but is everybody okay? What can I do to help? Is there anything I can do to help? If you want me to leave now, I'll leave now. Could you leave now? Great. Okay, I'm off. Give me a shout when I can come back down and have a proper chat. So there's something in all of that that I think is, what is it? How would I summarize it? I can't summarize anything quickly. What would I say? What I would say is leaders who care and create the context for people to be successful and the space for people to be successful is are the leaders that I'm always drawn to and I try to emulate. And I think those are the people that bring out the best in an organization. And the context for error-free organizations comes from your ability, I think, to, at least as a starting point, to create the environment for them to fail. And to, you know, whatever failure means, but to learn from what they've done and to know that they should not be afraid to put their hand up because they know the organization is so desperate to learn from it. And I think at a point where you've done that, then you create an environment to start putting more rigor into an organization. And what do I mean by that is once you've got the decision making at the right level, you can then have proper conversations with the people who are doing the work that you're kind of, you know, that you want them to do, and saying, right, okay, what's the best way of doing this more efficiently? How do you do that? How would we go about doing that? Rather than bringing in a bunch of people from McKinsey who'll charge you the earth and tell you what you knew already. Sorry if there's anybody from McKinsey on, and that's not personalised to McKinsey, of course. There's plenty of others that'll do that. But rather than doing that, ask the people who do the work, because they know. So what else? What else will I kind of finally say before I shut up? I think I love this. Another phrase I love. I love the phrase: "The lower standards you set are the highest you can expect from your organization." It's an absolute truism. So for me, you know, if you don't like, you know, when people talk, so we got a clay layer in our organization. We've got the permafrost. Look in the mirror, pal. That's the way the permafrost starts, is because of what you're doing as a leader. As a leader. So there's something about what's the context you create, that you, every time you walk out, and what you say and all the rest of it, is all of that kind of hangs together and is all important. So what would I summarize it as? It starts and ends with leadership for me. The creation of an environment where people can succeed is where it really starts. And as an anecdote, just to finish off, I've got the honor of leading this organization, Great British Nuclear, which I have no idea why the Prime Minister would want to take any of my advice. And FYI, he's listened to very little. So you can all relax. And it is genuinely, Claire would know this because she knows me, it was a huge surprise when I was asked to do this. This is not something I looked for, and probably makes it a great thing for me to do, because I just don't care what people think about me. That does really help as well. And what we're doing is really important. So we've had the opportunity to create an organization from absolutely nothing. And it's fascinating. We started off with, we had to do a sprint phase to get the organization set, to work out, to characterize the problem of new nuclear in the UK. And we did that over 100 days. And what we did was we went out to, we sat down, two or three of us sat down and said, who do we want in here? Well, we don't want the male, pale and stale people like me. What we need is a group of the young network, the youth network. So we went to two places, the youth network and the women's network. And we said, give us your best people, because we are now going to reinvent the future for all of you, for generations to come. What do you think of that? Do you want to play that game? And we had 40 people, and it was a mixture of about 25 from the civil service and 15 to 20 from industry. And the civil service people were absolutely amazing. Just some of the most talented people I've ever worked with. And what we did is we said, right, let's go talk to everybody in the nuclear industry worldwide and get some opinion, and then we'll pull it all together into some thoughts. And one of the key streams was, what's the organizational structure look like, and what type of organization do we want? So we got the head of the youth network to run that work stream for us. And for anybody who knows a lady called Alice Gardner, she's having a second baby at the moment. And she is the most stunning human being I've ever worked with. She is just fantastic. And she ran this work stream and said, here's what I think this organization needs to look like to be successful. Here are the values I think we should live from. Here's how we might do it, all that kind of stuff. And by the way, if we're serious about a diversity in our workforce for the nuclear industry, we need to be the role models. So we absolutely need to be very clear on what we're creating. And we created a set of values, and it would be all the standard stuff that you'd think about. But we said we're going to live from care, we're going to live from inclusion, we're going to we're going to deliver on our promises. We're a program delivery organization, and kindness will be at the heart of who we are, and a number of other things. What was really fascinating was we then went through a bit of a hiatus. And that I didn't realize how, even in an embryonic organization, how fragile that is. And I was starting to step back because as you could probably guess, I don't do non-executive very well. I'm just like, come on, let's go. Here we go. Come on. So I don't do non-executive very well. As I was backing off, we could all see that it was starting to, the time pressure's on, we're going to drive, we're going to be a program organization. Yeah, what happened to those kind of stuff we were talking about? Oh, we haven't got time for that, and it's just, okay, so we then had to reset. So even in an organization that's only 9 months old, essentially, we've already had to have a reset. It is so fragile and requires real intervention by everybody, in a leadership level, and you need to talk about it and listen to where people are, and really work hard to make sure that you're embedding the culture that you intend to. And it takes so much work to make sure that it's there, and it genuinely is so fragile, because you can start going off in a direction, and it's almost like you don't notice it, but you've really got to be tuned into the fact that if you have a set of principles and values that you're going to operate to, best you have a way of keeping yourself honest and making sure that you stick to them. So whatever you put in place is quite fragile. Let me pause at that, because as you can probably tell, my wife is right. I have trouble shutting up.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much. It's really interesting, but you've smashed through the questions I was going to ask you. One of the things I would remind you of is, when you joined FREng, remember we were caught up in the treacle of the nuclear industry, and we were an aging workforce, and we didn't think we were allowed to change.
Yeah.
And so by investing in leadership and letting us know more about ourselves, we created this change that created innovation. And one of the things you used to say was that if we could imagine starting something and only getting to 60% of it, how extraordinary that would be compared to zero.
Yeah.
And that kind of gave everyone permission to not quite succeed at what the big thing that was in their head might turn into only 60% of that big thing. But it gave everyone permission to accept that they might not get to yes.
Yeah.
And the support for that through all the leadership, including yourself, obviously, was fantastic. So yeah, great story. And I'm also desperate to let Alice Gardner know that you just name checked her on a webinar as the most fabulous human being. So I'll wait until the end of the webinar for that.
Yeah.
There are some questions. One of the things that we've seen some quotes, and I'll come back to the quotes because Simon can only stay with us for another
22 till 4 o'clock. I got a leg at just after 4.
Teresa said that's where we often fail as leaders, not supporting the wrong decision. And Mike said it's interesting that leaders will reward the same decision if it turns out successful, and hold people accountable if it turns out bad. Same decision, different results. Let
me give you a great example of that, and this is back to the Diana conversation. So Diana and I do a lot of work with the RNLI, which is the US Coast Guard. So it's the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, and we had a fantastic conversation about whether people get rewarded or whether people get punished. So if they save a life but break every rule in the book, they get a medal.
Yeah.
If they lose a life or don't, or doesn't go quite right, then there is consequences. So I think that is a huge one to think about, and it's actually very difficult to tackle. Very difficult, because in an environment, particularly in that sort of environment. But yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah,
we've been. Sorry, Claire. Yeah,
no, you can choose.
Yeah, we very same organisation. We've been working with the RNLI now for the last 4 years, and that one is difficult to overcome. But just kind of picking up on that, I guess, that hero mentality, which we see a lot, and I certainly saw that in my years in the nuclear industry. When something in the power plant was broken, everyone was like in high gear, motoring, and everyone was kind of fired up to do that. But what we saw, and so actually our error rate was quite low when the pressure was on us. When the pressure was not on us and the units were running perfectly, we were on the bars, and we weren't sort of two shifting and things like that. That's when we were seeing lots more human errors. So that hero mentality kind of becomes self-prophesizing, I think, sometimes as well.
Yeah, you're bang on. It's as true in the RNLI as it is in industry. Years gone by, the people who got it was the people who operated the night shift valves. How on earth do you operate a valve that is 20 meters in the air in the middle of nowhere? We do that at night. Oh, good. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
How's that working?
It's just dark. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly.
Sorry, we did have some more questions in there. I liked Paul Daly had a good question, and I know it's a bit more general than but I think it's quite a nice one too. So oh sorry, no, it was Phil, actually. Phil, is it the intent for Great British Nuclear to change the old British Nuclear? I think you've probably already answered it.
Yeah, I mean, are we going to try and change all of the nuclear industry? No, I mean, nor do we have the remit to do that. But what I would hope that we can do is form a bit of a beacon where people get kind of drawn to it, so that there is. So if you take as an example, the nuclear industry's got an objective to get 40% females by 2030. We just won't achieve that. However, if Great British Nuclear sets out that we are going to do that, and we're not going to, we're absolutely going to deliver that, then that does send a big message to the organisation. I think the old way of doing nuclear, in the way that the old way of doing anything in the process industry, can't survive, because we just don't have enough people. We're going to have to double the workforce in defence and civil nuclear in the next 10 years, and that isn't going to come from people like me. It's going to come from a whole set of diverse backgrounds, both in terms of, race, gender. We've just got to completely reinvent the pool that we recruit from, and we've got to get rid of the new. And it was the same actually in BP. Actually, is we're very snobby about. Oh, you haven't got any oil and gas experience. We haven't got any nuclear experience. You haven't got a nuclear qualification. Well, actually, I don't need it. When we talked about Great British Nuclear, I wanted to drop the name, because the nuclear part is kind of irrelevant. We're a program management company. That's what we do. But there's some really big things that we've got to do to completely reinvent the way nuclear talks about itself, because we've got to attract more people in. And there's something about leading with net zero, because net zero is so important, and nuclear is just a part of that. And we've got to address this, white 50 to 60-year-old man, like me, who runs it. We've actually got the dinner tonight, and we're running a sweepstake on how many tables are full of blokes like me. And by the way, if it's a large number, that's not good.
No. I was really interested. I was really interested. And I'm kind of monopolizing the webinar a little bit, but I was really interested and pleased that you talked about decision making, because this is an area where, when we're working with our clients, this is an area where there's a lot of opportunity to improve, but there's a fear of taking that step. I saw it in the nuclear industry in my years, when you highly trained, really competent, unit operators and things like that, who were deferring to more senior leaders who maybe had never, they'd come up through the electrical arm of the business or something along those lines. And although, we were trying to embrace those high reliability principles, or, pushing decisions down through the organization to the appropriate level, it was a thin veneer.
Yeah.
And are you seeing a change, or how are you gonna change that?
So I think in Urenco, I think we were really successful because it was a really comprehensive program in the way we did it. In Devonport Royal Dockyard, which is my other role, we've been wholly unsuccessful. And why is that? I think it comes down to the fact that we haven't actually listened to the first and second level leaders and what their world is. I mean, it's a very traditional organization anyway. The culture started back in the 1600s.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. Yes. It's a long time to form a personality, isn't it? Ain't changing that in 2 days. But there's also something about when you go and talk to them, they'll say stuff like, well, look at my facilities. I can't even get an iPhone. And every time I ask for this to be done, you just don't listen. You go, well, guess what? Nothing's going to change until you address the kind of domestics and housekeeping issues that they've got to deal with, and they genuinely feel supported. At a point where you can do that, then they will start to let go, because they'll see that they can, the way for them to progress is not to have every decision, is to allow you to pass it down the organization. But unless you support them and they know that that cultural journey is something you expect, and you're going to measure it and you want it, and they will have, you want them to be coaches. And of course, you equip them to do that, then I just don't think you'll make progress in that space. Does that
I
make
agree.
sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. Thank you. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Teresa. There was a question, and you've partially answered it, but Mike Petrowski asked, let me find it. Why did your group choose nuclear power for your research? Were there any other organisations that were considered?
We did. Yes, we did. So the primary, the terms of reference of what we did were primarily aimed at who's done nuclear and who's done it well. And that was part of the research, but a lot of the other research was done into major programs, because that's exactly what this is. How do major programs get successfully delivered? And the answer is not many of them do. If any of you've really bored at Christmas on your beach, read How Big Things Get Done. It is massively insightful and really interesting, and it'll tell you why 95% of mega projects don't succeed. And therefore we looked at a lot of both international projects and UK projects to try and learn from them. Could we have gone broader? Well, yeah, we probably could have. But I think we were at a point where we had a real consistency in the messages, which said, actually, we don't need to be 100% right. 100% wrong. We may as well be 80% right. And that's exactly where we kind of ended up and said, on balance, we think we're about there.
Thank you. Is that okay for you, Mike? Thank you.
That's a phenomenal jumper you've got. Absolutely, just amazing.
Yeah, and it's the same on the back. There's no getting away from it, Simon. It's a Tyrannosaurus Rex that spits out rainbows and boffs Christmas ribbons.
Lovely. Well done.
There's lava in it and every space. There's cats on pizzas, pigs on pizzas. It's amazing.
I'm loving how these webinars have evolved since I stopped attending, Claire, because, we're even having costume changes in the middle now. I didn't know that was a thing these days for the webinar. I'm so impressed. You've gone up market, girl. I'm so impressed with you.
I'm just looking for how big things.
Okay. Right. Okay. Let's Simon, we've got you for another 10 minutes. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
Anyone want to unmute yourself and come and comment or ask Simon a question before he disappears?
Probably just plain.
Yeah, Mike, please do. Yeah.
Just listening to the conversation about pushing decision making further down in the organization. What do you think about a hybrid where management involves workers in the decision making process?
I think inherently I think it's got to be both, because there are certain decisions, and I think you're right, Mike, is that there are certain decisions that if you take for an example, let me take for an example in my kind of my operating world. If you've got a decision as to whether the guys should keep the plant on or off, they know the parameters that they should be operated to, and they are best to make that decision. I am not comfortable. I don't think that's safe. Well, shut it down then. You make that decision. You don't need to escalate that. And you're then in a world where you say, right, okay, I want to start it back up, which is naturally going to take a bit more time. You've done your analysis. You've done your root cause analysis of what is. You really understood what caused you to be in the position, the plant configuration that you are, and what happened. Well, let's have a conversation before we do start it up. But a restart, I think, on a major plant, a nuclear plant or a process plant, is naturally a plant manager's decision. But would you ever do that in isolation from the operators? Absolutely not. You'd want them all in a room. So I do think it involves all of it. I think it's more forcing decision making down is too lazy. It is putting decisions where they are best made, I think, is a better way of putting it.
Yes, I would agree, as long as you define the parameters in which that person has the authority to make those decisions.
Oh, but yeah, you've got to set the boundaries, and they've got to understand the boundaries within which they operate.
Phil's got a question there for you. Phil, do you want to just come in and ask your question?
Yeah, great. I must say, Simon, I've loved everything you say, and it completely resonates with my view of the world as well.
Thank you.
Just before I ask the question, I've got to think about, my ears pricked up and you said the first thing is, asking the questions. And I always say, the first thing is leading with respect, but I think they're one of the same.
Yeah.
So I really love that, and I'm going to sort of steal that as well. But the thing I get is that I often see a lot of the problems are the senior managers who are driven by metrics. And have you got any top tips to sort of help change their mindset? And I think that's a very broad question, but I'm sure there's no simple answer. But just interested to hear your thoughts.
You're probably not talking to the right person, because my biggest weakness, and one of my coaches, because I have a couple, I keep saying I can't say the word I would usually use, but my boss is and make the rest up for yourself, and it's normally not that complimentary. And this guy's been coaching me for the best part of 20 years, and he keeps saying to me, "He said, don't tell me you're working for another expletive." And I went, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Have you ever thought that the expletive is actually you?" And he thinks, "Oh, okay, fine, right, okay." So managing upwards has never been a huge strength of mine. I think what's the serious point is, we're all these are all businesses that we're running, and therefore the metrics that you use logically have to deliver on shareholder return and shareholder performance, and in the context of whatever the business is. So the metrics that you use have to service that. Now, if there are certain metrics, so I'll give you a live example would be in an organization where the corporate center does not understand the safety requirements that you have in that particular business unit, and you have to argue it. And I'm afraid I don't think there's any replacement for strong and bold leadership to say, "I'm sorry, these are the things that we have to measure, and just because our profit is 1% down, or I've got to spend an extra, whatever, £500,000, £1 million on these things I've got to do, that is licensed to operate, and you have put me as the leader of this organization, and therefore I am, so I think there is something around defining when you're having the conversation about your performance, you have to define the context, and the context is safe operations and license to operate, or we will not treat our people like this. We have declared we're not going to. It's not consistent. Therefore, I'm not prepared to do it. And eventually, you never want to play this card too often, but it does come down to, that's what I stand for as a leader. And if you don't agree with that, then probably you need another leader here, because I'm not prepared to compromise my values. Of course, I'm prepared to listen to your point of view and see if I can find a middle ground to say how I can deliver on my values and what our organization needs. But at the end of the day, if you're not prepared to buy that, then we've both got to make some decisions. And I that's not a terribly good answer, but I don't have a better one, unfortunately.
No, and I agree with the point you made, well, with all you said actually, but especially the you've got to figure out what their motivations are, what their metrics are, and then make your questioning and change around those metrics, so to improve them, make them, think they're getting something out of it by this.
Yeah,
yeah. Thank you very much.
Give them what you want on give them what you want on your terms.
Yeah,
it's but it's not easy.
Simon, have you got time for one more question?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got for Phil. If you can unmute Phil and ask your question. The other Phil, not Phil Gilling.
No, it's Phil Harris. Simon, you mentioned measurements. Earlier on, in your talk, you spoke about culture and how we measure culture, particularly in the nuclear industry, is something that's been a real challenge for me in the 40-something years that I've been in the industry. Yeah, and I'm one of these grey-haired white guys, 45 years in the industry. But I really believe that we have a real challenge in the nuclear industry, not just in the UK, but worldwide, with how we understand safety how we define safety, and how we measure safety. I've had the opportunity on numerous occasions to speak to current and past leaders of nuclear power plants in the UK and other parts of the world. And I asked the question, do you believe your plant is safe? And they all say, yeah, of course. We had a good, healthy safety culture. I said, well, how did you measure that? And I go back to a point that you made, and this is a bit of a challenge for you, really, when you said that the culture of an organization is a bit like the personality of a person. How do you measure someone's personality?
Well,
that's where we are with the industry, particularly in the world of safety, where I spend most of my time. So I think it's a real challenge for all of us to change the way we think, and certainly to ensure that the new plants that come online are operated in a manner where we understand how work is done, where we understand that this is done in a safe manner rather than just assuming. Sorry,
well,
that's you finished now.
And you can't just that's absolutely the point, Phil. You cannot assume. And what gets measured gets done. Is an old. I think it's a truism. How do you measure culture? Well, gosh, a lot of it. So there are some really good safety culture measurement tools, which, but all they do is point you at where you might look. They don't, and they give you a view, because it's all opinion based of where you think you are, and I do think they've absolutely got their place. But are we as an organisation being kind and caring? If you say that that's your values, the only way to test that is by asking people. I think,
unfortunately, people, and it goes back to another point that you made. People aren't always prepared to give the answer that is the truism. They give the answer that is often thought of being required or being asked for.
Well, but that's absolutely an indication of culture, and the only way you find out whether it's true or not is by going. I had the benefit of having people like Claire who would tell me absolutely straight, and it's a failure of the plant managers if they don't have a connection with their teams so that they can go to their go-to people, their honest brokers, and say, has what I've said landed? No, it's total BS. You're talking nonsense. No, what you've said is not true. Here's the truth on the ground. And every organization is part of that. And like it or not, I've always used the unions as a really, really important sounding board for me, because you tend to get, you'll get opinion squared from a lot of guys you deal with in the union itself. But what you also get is people who are trained professionals in safety who really understand, and it's their job to represent their people. So I think all of it comes back to, if you say you care and you care about culture, the only way to, one, understand it, and two, to influence it, is to be out there listening to what they're saying, and for them to critically trust you, so that, and all of the leaders around you, so that they will tell you the truth. There is no better answer to it, and it gets more and more difficult the bigger the organisations come up. And the only solution I found to that is to find leaders that I believe really understand this as a premise, to do your kind of testing for you to really work out whether the major interventions you're making are working. So.
Simon, I'm just watching the time here, and I know that you've got to get away. So it's 4:01, and we don't want to delay you. Can I just thank you so much for joining us today. This has just been it's been inspirational listening to you talk. I definitely want to have a follow-up conversation, because you're clearly working with at least 4 of my clients. And I want to find out what they're saying about me. So
yeah, fine.
But no, this has been amazing. Thank you to Claire for organising this. We'll be hanging around for a few more minutes, everyone, if you want to hang on and have our usual Christmas catch up. But Simon, thank you so much. Please come back and join us again.
Thanks, Simon.
So delighted. It sounded to me like the ramblings of an idiot. I've got to be honest. When I was listening to myself, I was thinking, this just sounds like complete nonsense. I'm never watching this back on YouTube. I'm never watching this back on YouTube. Please don't put it on. If it's given you some insights or food for thought, that was my intention. And Claire, I'm gonna reject your request to judge the Christmas jumpers. I'm handing that to Teresa. She can do it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Cheers, mate.
It's my absolute pleasure. That's the payback for, yes, of course, I'll be delighted to talk to.
Thank you.
If there's anything I haven't answered, or anything that people think they would like to, make a point about, then Claire, you got my contact details.
Yeah, no worries. I'll let you know.
Have a fabulous Christmas all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, and you.
Take care. Take care, Simon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.